And we're live. Hopefully. How is everybody?
How are you, Stuart?
I'm good. I'm good. How about you, David?
I'm good. I'm good.
Excited? I guess not. Okay. All right. Well, cool.
He looks nervous. It's
I'm
okay.
good. I'm good. I unmuted myself.
That is important.
Today we're going to be talking about some of the Bissigverse, building a Starfleet, the Community Edition, Chapter 1. If you guys want to take a look and follow along, there is a link in the and come up with some questions. Hopefully you got some good questions. Please super chat in to show your support for David, and get some good questions for this universe creator.
I'm gonna say I appreciate that you've mooked Stuart a bit. On this side of Stuart's face is a Star Wars droid, and a second ago you were there's a stormtrooper helmet. Yes,
Oh.
keep it in frame. Other way. Wrong way, David. Wrong way. Yes.
Okay.
Well framed.
Doing my
Perfect. All right. Patrick says Samuel, your audio is a little loud compared to the other two.
Alrighty
So.
then. I think two people.
But anyway.
Skype changes a little bit. Yes.
David, why don't you tell us what we're here to talk about and learn about today?
So, everybody, this is the Bissigverse. We are going to the beginning. We're going to square one. We're going to talk about first contact, and we're going to explain my universe starting there, moving forward. We're going to examine everything, literally everything. Definitely stuff that you never thought Star Trek would be touching. We're going to be touching it. Yes, I said that. So.
Sounds kind of dirty. But anyhow, tell us about the project. I mean, we've got a bunch of videos of you from the Basicverse already. I've created a Basicverse playlist if anybody wants to check that out as well. All the content we've done with David. So please go check that out. But do that after the live. So I guess just give people that don't know maybe an introduction into what the Basicverse is.
Because this picture shows, of course, that we know Cochrane, but we know the actor's uniform, but not the actor, and then a Beyond-esque sort of maybe uniform. It's and the Narrow Never check, so combines real fiction and whatnot.
Yes. So we got the cover on the screen here. So the Bissigverse is essentially my one-man reband of Star Trek. Essentially, is kind of what it turned into. For a couple of years, I kind of putzed around just making models, and but the way my brain works is I always try to make things make sense. And as we talked about a little bit in the teaser video, Star Trek is 50, 60 years old now. It was never really envisioned to be what it's turned into at its inception. And because of that, there's a lot of shoehorning. The story doesn't always make sense. There's just a lot of stuff in it that just doesn't really click very well together from a grand narrative standpoint. And I was a history major. I'm huge into open source intel and geopolitical studies and stuff like that. And obviously U.S. Army vet as well, so I have a military background. And I want to take all of that and bring it to Trek and say, well, now that we know kind of what the story is, what if somebody just said, well, we're going to just quote unquote reboot it, and we'll try to keep as much of the old stuff as we can, but we're going to make changes where we need to make the whole story make sense here, and also maybe line up a little bit more with reality as we understand it today. One great example is, we're not going to be using pen and paper on a starship 250 years from now, right? When every 3-year-old has an iPad in their hand now, right? So things like that. We're going to be working on that.
And for clarity of those really super nerds out there, it's not so much that there's not a point in time where your timeline diverged. It's just a sidestep, which allows total freedom.
Correct.
There isn't unlike Intramural Darkly where you kind of see and then shift. This isn't that. This is a fresh.
Correct. This is a totally separate thing. So think of it as like the way that the JJ verse worked. It's a totally separate thing. You can't connect it to the old stuff very well. So that's what we're looking at here. And this is a history book series that I've put together that's going to take us through the formation of the Federation Starfleet. And it's going to run, don't quote me on this, but we're thinking it's going to run about 10 pieces right now, and it's going to start here at the beginning with Zephyr and Cochrane and First Contact, and essentially will end with the formation of the Federation and the signing of the Federation Starfleet Charter. And we're going to cover everything in between, and a really substantial, like probably like 60% of this project is going to be my take on the Romulan War, as well as nobody who writes fan fiction can't not do their own take on the Earth Romulan War. I mean, it's just kind of a thing, right? I mean, you guys have other people you work with that do it. So if you're a serious Star Trek fan fiction writer, you have to write your own version of the Romulan War, or else you don't count.
Yeah. All right, so starting at the beginning, we got First Contact, which I assume happens exactly like it does in the movie, more or less.
Or more or less, yeah, more or less. We have, and just a quick side note, just on the introduction page that Sam just had up, the just so the audience knows what they're reading here, the book is presented to you, the audience, as if it was like written in universe. So it's if you lived in the Bissigverse for real, and you went on Memory Bank Alpha, and you were like a high schooler who needed to get a textbook for a history class, like this is something that you would go get off of that network, essentially. Just for clarification, so some of the stuff that you see in here like makes sense from an in-universe perspective from when you're reading it. Sorry, just wanted to add that in there. And I like quotes too. So I thought that the quote from Prime Minister Winston Churchill was very apt for the story we're telling here. This is my favorite Winston Churchill quote of all time. And he gave this speech called the Great Declaration in June of 1941, right as the Battle of Britain was approaching its peak and everything looked really awful. There's a lot of analogies to what was going on in England at the time to what's going on Earth right now, where we have warp drive and we've met the Vulcans, so there's hope to get through, but we just thermonuclearly blasted the planet to smithereens and everything's awful right now. But I just thought this was a really important message to kind of plant the flag at the beginning of the story here, saying that everything is awful right now, but it's going to get better. And that it's right there in the quote: "Out of the depths of sorrow and of sacrifice will be born again the glory of mankind." And that is the story we're going to tell here.
Everything is awful. Sorry. All right, so. First of all, I gotta say I love this picture of the T-Plan Hoth like taking off and leaving, being escorted by fighter jets, and you see the inside of the cockpit as well. I love that. It's great.
Yeah.
Now,
that was fun.
We'll do talk about the development, because of course to actually fully art original artwork, that how much is original art, how much is Photoshop, how much is stock footage with a sheen, because a lot of these images we'll see are creatively valid. But are they all fully original?
So we have 3 or 4 different avenues we do artwork here. So first off, we have hired artists, and we're going to talk about their work as we see it. I do the majority of the 3D work. Sometimes I have some help from my friends. We put some credits at the end there for them. We have AI art generation that we make use of through the use of Midjourney, and then occasionally in these like composite images, I guess is what we'll call it, which is what you're seeing on the screen right now. This is like 75% me, but like the photo is from Google, and the T'Plana Hoth model is from Doug Drexler's old files. Again, all of this is in the credits at the back. So whenever something that we didn't create ourselves is used, we do accredit it at the back here, just to give proper respects. But like, we're not like using other people's stuff per se. When I say we're using other people's stuff, what I mean is like, for example, the background picture of San Francisco here, and things like that. And making this image was fun because I made a 3D model of the 6th generation fighter, and then I did some Photoshop, and the interior of the cockpit you see is from a flight game I played called DCS, where I just took a screenshot out the window of a fighter jet and cropped out what you saw to make it look like it was the pilot looking out of it.
That's very effective.
Yeah, and this what you're seeing in the picture here, we talk about it later. This is part of day 2, the day after First Contact, essentially, where the T'Plana Hoth, Solkar, and Zephyr and Cochrane are flying to go meet some world leaders in San Francisco. And of course, they panic and put all the fighters in the air because nobody knows what's going on. They just see an alien spaceship flying through the sky, and of course they try to shoot it down, and the missiles just crash into the shields, and the Vulcans just kind of shake their heads like, well, eventually they'll run out of missiles and everybody will calm down. It's the thought process.
Now, does any of you guys know the link between the T-Planet Hoth and Star Wars? No?
Oh, wow. No.
Well, T-Planet Hoth is Planet Hoth with the T, put it before the P, and the O turned to an H. Kirk Thatcher, when he was working on Star Trek 4, had the question about T-Planet Hoth, and that's what he got his Star Wars reference in there by doing that. So once you know that, you'll never forget it.
Now I know. See, that's something I didn't know. So
yeah,
I guess this is Stuart's show now. I'll just shut up and let him do the rest. So
now we know that San Francisco is a very important place in future Trek lore. Is it also as important? If this is Cochrane's era, what's in San Francisco that generates there's the place to have the conversation, or is it?
Well, we have some pictures, so let's get to that. Let's go to our next slide. So we're going to talk about that. So on our next page here, we got, the Phoenix and a lot of text, and I tried to put what I felt was a healthy balance of text to images. Some sections have more images, some have more text, just, whatever I thought felt right. And we get a little summary here of what happens in First Contact, essentially. And, we see the events of First Contact play out in the movie, First Contact. And one of the offline questions we got, I think I'd just address it here because it's one that I think I've gotten a couple times from people in Discord and from other sources, was just kind of like, how does the events of the movie First Contact play out in relation to what's happening in the Bissigverse here? And thankfully, I anticipated this question when I was writing it, and there is a line in this book that I think very explicitly addresses the answer to that question. Now, you, the readers, have to go find it, but this is something I did think of, and there is one line in a page on here that I feel very undeniably answers that question once and for all, whether or not that things played out or if the events of First Contact as we saw them, actually something similar to that ended up happening here in this universe too. So just wanted to throw that in there. Interesting.
But you got to go looking for it. You're not going to tell us.
Yeah, no, you got to read it. You got to go find it. I'm not going to tell you. You got to go find it. Essentially, what we want to talk about here is coming up on the next page here is really kind of the background to what was going on in the bigger picture with the Vulcans initiating First Contact. And I think we kind of teased this question out a little bit on the preview we did, where it was kind of a controversial decision that Sokar made because this was not his mission to do this. And what he was doing was not following protocol as established by the Vulcan High Command or the Scientific Expeditionary Fleet, which, by the way, Sokar was not a member of the Vulcan High Command, by the way, and the T-Planet Hoth is not a vessel of the High Command. So a lot of people are familiar with the Vulcan Science Academy. They have their own kind of outgoing fleet of research and survey vessels that they have, and he and that ship are part of that organization, which is basically just called, the Expeditionary Fleet. So they're not really military per se, if that makes sense. Essentially what happens is Sokar makes a snap decision here with seeing the information that's going on, and to try to give some clarity to why he decides, because Vulcans are not a very impulsive bunch, right? We don't think of Vulcans just kind of going out on a whim and just doing random things for no reason. In the back of his mind, he's thinking, when he's looking at the map, essentially, Earth is in a very delicate location in relation to the Tellarites, the Andorians, Vulcan, and some other powers that are going on. And he sees apparently a human warp ship taking off from the planet conducting a test flight. And in the back of his mind, he's thinking like, wow, okay, humans are going to very quickly become aware of things that are going on around them now, and we do not want the Andorians getting to these people first, because at this time in the greater galaxy, the Andorians and the Vulcans are at each other's throats, and things are very nasty between them. They've already fought a series of conflicts. They have a couple more they're still going to fight before we get to the events of Star Trek Enterprise. And he's just like, if I don't do this now, he's like, I guarantee in a week an Andorian ship is going to come through, and then they're going to do it, and then these people are going to be in the pockets of the Andorians then, and then that will put us in a very bad strategic situation if you look at the map. And that's logic is also why ultimately his actions are excused for not following proper protocol with things, because the Vulcan High Command ultimately agrees with him.
Well, that kind of answers the first online question we have from Thomas R. Were the humans aware of the Andorians at this point, and did they make first contact with them? Also, if not, will first contact be the same as seen in Star Trek Enterprise?
So, at first contact, obviously not. The humans are only going to know about the people that the Vulcans want them to know about. And in my opinion, at some point relatively soon after this, the humans will know who the Andorians are and what they're all about. Because, like, the way I would say explain it is, like, imagine you lived in Spain in any year, doesn't matter. Imagine you lived in Spain and you had no functional concept of what Italy was, or Italians. Like that was, to me, the same thing as saying the humans don't know who the Andorians are or what they are, especially given the history the Vulcans have with them. So there might not be like an official meeting of humans and Andorians prior to the events of Star Trek Enterprise, but there's no way that the humans and Starfleet would not know a pretty substantial lot about the Andorians. Now, some of it might be biased, of course. The Vulcans are going to have their way of explaining the Andorians and try to talk them up to be these nasty, awful people who you want nothing to do with, and then the events will play out how they play out. But they'd be aware of them. Definitely they'd be aware of them. Probably not any kind of diplomatic relations, because to the Andorians, the humans are essentially a hostile force at this point, because they are part of the Vulcan Protectorate program. There's Vulcan military starbase in the Sol system with a Vulcan military fleet presence there. So, if you're doing a war game here and you're anticipating fighting the Vulcans, they would have the humans probably on the Vulcan side, at least for the events of the immediate future here. But any hoozles, moving on. Some of the art there, one of the pictures is from the movie, and the other one was actually made with AI art assistance. So that is an actual, like, the Planahoth picture I cropped into it, but everything else you see there was AI art generated. Now we're going to go to something Sam is a little bit more excited to talk about, I think, because we get our first big shot of some spaceships here. So. Ooh. Sam, what do you want to say about this?
Yeah, it's first spaceships. But you already have the Phoenix in there, so.
Oh, well, okay. Well, first new spacecraft.
Yeah. So what was the? Okay. So the Vulcans, they realized that they have to come and help Earth essentially. So I guess that's this next part where they kind of bring a delegation and they talk to all the world representatives or whatever. Mm-hmm. So what was that like?
So very chaotic, to put it mildly. So second first contact plays out essentially in that picture we just talked about a second ago, where the Planahoth lands in San Francisco, and what is left of some semblance of the United Nations government is there. And there's very few actual countries left at this point. We mentioned in one of the side blurbs that trade had only just resumed between China and the United States like a year prior to first contact, and trade itself was an extremely dangerous thing because there's pirates and marauders all over the place. There's no U.S. Navy world policeman anymore, so you got to take your life into your own hands now when you're crossing the Pacific Ocean, because who knows what you're going to run into out there. And they've decided essentially that the planet is screwed and we need to try to start getting our act together, but nobody really knows what to do because everything's destroyed and there's very few major cities even left on the planet from which to draw resources and healthy populations from to even do any of this. So the Vulcans, of course, realize that, well, everything is really bad here and this is going to be a really big project, and this is not like this. We've seen this in 1,000 Star Trek episodes before, right? Planet's in peril, send the Enterprise, they're going to go save the day with their fancy technology and push the asteroid away from the planet, etc. Insert beeline story here, right? That's not how this would work in real life. A better way of thinking about this is, imagine a country, it's very far away. Let's pick some like Kenya, right? Very far away from the United States. If the United States is the Vulcans, and there's a massive nuclear catastrophe in Kenya, right? Now, there's some people we could get in very quickly, right? We might send a couple planes of people with emergency responders and coordinators and people who are going to set the groundwork conditions for eventually the U.S. Ninth Fleet to come in and provide support and relief operations, right? So what these guys are essentially doing, these first two ships that show up, are basically the Vulcans saying, hey, we got your message, Solkar. This is the only two ships we had in the area. There's really not a whole lot we can do other than start setting the groundwork for a significantly 200 times order of magnitude larger operation to follow, which we've already relayed to the people back home who said they're willing to do, but it's going to take a couple weeks to get this put together and get over to you. So their job here is to essentially gather information, intelligence, reach out, make all the necessary contacts with people on Earth, kind of say, hey, we're not here to invade, conquer, and raise your cities to the ground. We're here to help. And you can imagine different countries are going to have different responses to that. Some countries will be very receptive, and some countries might even be outright hostile, saying, no, you're lying, there's no way you're telling the truth. And that would be a very complicated dance for them to weave.
Yeah.
Well, that brought up one of
the other online questions is from Flowraptor, who says, is the Bissigverse World War III in line with what we are told in Strange New World Season 1 or different?
Well, we don't get too terribly much information. We get more information in Season 1 of Strange New Worlds than I think we get in all of Star Trek prior to that, with basically just some lines of dialogue from a couple random episodes, or really only a couple lines of dialogue from First Contact. And the premise of the story is you had the Western Alliance and the Eastern Coalition basically nuke each other out of existence. And the super short answer to that in the Bissigverse is planet Earth goes through a lot of troubles in the 2020s and 2030s, and this leads into the rise of the augments. The augments essentially take over society, and quickly after taking over, they start fighting amongst each other. So the plan for Pax Humanity didn't really work out because the augments all wanted to fight each other, and then the humans, who the augments ruled over, rebelled against them, and this is the eugenics wars happening out here. But the problem is, instead of a happy ending, it's a bad ending, because it's not like Superman and the heroes win. It's just worse humans than the augments end up winning that fight, and ultimately end up establishing two super PAC blocks, which are the Western Alliance and the Eastern Coalition. And then some years after that, they end up annihilating each other again. So it's really kind of like a decade and a half of continuous conflict on the planet, which is non-nuclear in nature, and then at the end of this last one, it ends up in a ginormous thermonuclear weapons exchange across the planet. So I don't know how well that jives up with existing canon for what little of it exists, but that's what we're doing here.
Well, that brought up a question to me then. If you've got the Cochrane equals, we got their interest up, how many other places on the planet are developing spacecrafts of any kind to then also have a voice, a say? Because obviously some guy in some place made some drive, now he's the celebrity, but if he has no money, there'd be governments that would have space, multiple ships potentially, not fast and light, but you'd think ships that had weapons that were more, Cochrane's not going to have guns that are anywhere near capable of a government. So what was the reaction to all of the other, as few as there are, spacefaring parts of Earth? Or are they just kind of subdued by Vulcans?
That's such a good question, Sam. I've dedicated an entire section of the book to just answering that question. So hold on to that thought.
So it's in this.
It's in this. Yeah. So we're gonna get to that. There's a whole section basically just talking about the other warp drive initiatives that are happening around the planet. Cool. So hang on to that. It's an important thing though, because that's a very real thing.
There's one more question from General Dallows. How are the events of First Contact? How do they play into this story here? I don't know if we've kind of gone over that a little bit, but this one.
Yeah, I would say I would just have to reiterate there is one line in this book that very explicitly states our position on that, and you guys have to go read it and got to go find it.
Okay, perfect. All right.
But yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, we got a lot of AI art here coming up on this one. So just a real quick note on the AI art. Because the AI art is developing at such a rapid pace. This was actually made, all of this art you're seeing here was made using the V4 engine of Midjourney. And we now have access to the V5 engine, which is being used in Chapter 2. And you guys have seen the stuff coming out for Chapter 2 that the public has not. And I think Stuart, would agree. Like you with some of the stuff in the new one, you cannot tell the difference. Like you look at it and you cannot tell that that's not a photograph of Zephyr and Cochrane and Lily walking around on Alpha Centauri, because it looks like somebody literally just took a picture of that.
Yeah, it's very impressive stuff.
So this stuff, it's not as perfect as I would like, but it gets the story across. And
well, stylized is good.
Sometimes. And what we're looking at here is just kind of the condition of Earth, right? At the time that this is all going on, you have refugee camps all over the damn place. The United States and the People's Republic of China just fought 2 internal civil wars prior to first contact happening, where basically the Eastern Coalition, which was centered in China, and the Western Alliance, which was centered in the United States, these were both basically fascist dictatorships. And after the Third World War and everything blew up, essentially, what was left of these fascist institutions was essentially dismantled by the people living in it. So we see a reconstitution of the United States as you understand it today, with the same principles and values as we understand it. And then similarly in China, we see a similar story play out where a new government, they call it the unity government, is then put together over there. It's technically the Third Coalition for any of our history buffs there. You had the first and the second coalition in the 1930s and during World War II, and then that thing went bust, and then the PRC took over and took over all of China, and now you have the third coalition government. Is essentially just a quick history note with that. Back to the Star Trek stuff is we have city cleanup going on. We have soil reclamation happening. That's a huge thing, right? Because, and we're going to get into this a little bit later at the end of this as to why that's such a big deal. Because Earth can't feed itself. The surviving populations are essentially slowly but surely starving to death here, which is part of the very immediate problem that the Vulcans need to figure out. And like sending in emergency cargo shipments of basically field rations to people so they don't starve to death, that's like a very short-term solution, but ultimately a long-term solution is needed, and that's the soil reclamation project. And we have some pictures of what I thought some of those reclamators might look like, and they basically deploy thousands of these across the planet, and they're working on basically tilling up soil, cleaning out the contaminants in it, and making the land arable again for farming and crop planting and stuff like that. And that's a project that's going to take decades. There's nothing you can very quickly do to clean soil, even with futuristic Vulcan technology. You still need to get in there.
So what you're saying is nukes bad?
Nukes are bad, yeah. For any world leaders listening right now, if you're contemplating nuclear warfare, I don't think you should, because nobody's going to win that. So,
his timing was just perfect.
Yeah, something like that.
Now, was this Vulcan drawn by somebody? Is it AI created then? This Vulcan chap. It's a very good shot.
That's by our artist Michelle. Yeah, so all
really
this
nice
kind of stuff you see, these portraits and things like this. She's our lead character, people artist. I've been working with her for a couple of years. We have links to her stuff at the end of this, so if anybody else wants to hire her for stuff or go check out her work, it's all in there. You totally should. She is a freaking rock star, and she's a hardcore nerd, big Trekkie, and like if you need somebody to do work like this, you want to get somebody who really cares and gets the content, and she knows Star Trek extremely well. So if anybody else needs to get Trek stuff drawn up, like, she's your girl. You absolutely should go talk to her.
How long do you think this piece took, if you can vaguely recall? Was this about days, months, weeks?
So she has a real job in addition to what she does here, so it all depends on her availability. But I mean, if she's not particularly busy, I mean, sometimes she's turned things around in 2 weeks or less. So
great.
It depends, but she has pretty reasonable rates too for the work that she offers, and she's very communicative too on everything going on. So I can't recommend her enough, but I don't want to recommend her too much because I still need her to do a lot more stuff for me. So I don't want her to get hired to the point where she's too busy to work for me.
I like that this guy was born 5 years ago. That's nice.
Yeah.
Very relatable.
But
so Trekyards a few years older than him, luckily.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too, right? So what you just caught on to there, he's talking about the birthday for Solkar, right? Is a lot of times, and I think a lot of us, especially the Trekyards community, I think can relate to this. When like you get like an Eagle Moss book, right, and you open it up and like here's a Federation starship, and then they say like no data exists on this thing, or like we don't know when the ship was commissioned. Like, could you imagine? Like, that is not how the real world works. I mean, we could pull records for the hour a ship was commissioned in the Royal Navy 400 years ago, and the crew complement and the construction methods used, and like there's people who write entire encyclopedias on this stuff, and that stuff's 400 years old. Like my point is, that is just, it's so fourth wall breaking to me. Like, that was one of the driving factors behind me doing this whole Bissigverse thing, because I was like, guys, like, I hate this. I hate that, like, we have, like, just no information on things. It's because, like, people just didn't take the time to write this stuff. Because, like, oh, who cares about the history? We just want to show the ship flying around going pew, 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 fire the phasers.
Well, no, they had 7 days to make a show. It's the least important stuff. I mean, they need to make the TV show. That's why.
Well, for the TV show, yes, but there's never any follow-on content afterwards. Like, there's never any good
There's a
books
technical
that
manual
dive into
that
it.
Rick
Wow.
did. If they kept hiring Rick, then they would have had more stuff, but, you know.
There are some ships, I guess, that doesn't apply to, but I think we all know that there's an overwhelming
Rick
majority
even
of
mostly
ships
wrote a Voyager one, but he didn't get finished with licensing, which is sad because he went into a lot of detail. And guys, we're 34 minutes in. Super chat your thoughts, comments, questions.
Yes.
Because you can literally derail with a question. So
I would love to get at least one super chat. I know it's a very niche topic, but one super chat.
And the link to the book that we're looking at is up in the pinned comment, guys. So go check it out and follow along with us if you want.
You can read ahead and ask very difficult questions.
And all the money goes to Trekyards, just in case there's any confusion on that. I don't get anything from this. This is all a Trekyards thing.
Yeah, for the super chats. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, 30% of it goes to YouTube.
Well, or
All
PayPal
hail
them if you don't want to
YouTube.
do that. Just PayPal them. But I won't see your comment if you PayPal.
So then you have this Vulcan fleet, which is very impressive. So this is all.
Oh, you skip the document? You don't want to talk about the super important historical document?
I mean, we will. Yeah, I mean, once we're out of time, we're out of time though. So I'm, got to keep conscious of the time before we get through everything.
Fair enough.
Up to you.
That's all right. We'll look at the ships.
$2, no question. But thank you so much, Shanti.
I made you $2. All right, there we go. That document, I guess, just a one-sentence summary on it. This is the first legal document signed between the Vulcans and the humans. And like I said, for anyone who likes geopolitical stuff, like this is in there for you guys if you like reading about current events and world affairs and history. Like, this is written in such a way that I tried to make it as realistic as possible to how this stuff is done in the real world today. And it's basically just outlining what the relationship between the humans and the Vulcans is going to be, what the Vulcan Protectorate program is, and how the human and Vulcan relationship is going to proceed moving forward. So this is from a in-universe history standpoint, this is a massively important document here, because this is what is needed to get the ball rolling for everything else that comes afterwards with the United Earth Government and eventually the United Federation of Planets. Okay, now we can look at the ships.
You did all the signatures. You get your friends to do those, or?
No, I actually drew some of them myself, and I had to go online to get some stuff because I can't write in Hindu or Mandarin very well. So, but the rest of them, though, I actually did like a lot of takes drawing them myself.
Cool.
I'm gonna say that the structures. I mean, anybody that knows handwriting, say that most of those were done by the same person. So, just saying.
Yeah, maybe I'll hire other people if we need more signatures.
BJ Toronto throws in $1 again with no comment, but thank you so much appreciated. All right, so now we're moving on to the fleet.
So how much of that is grain and food and such? Do you think then? Because it's a lot of containers.
Well, I would say there's probably a mix because they wouldn't be able to do more than the food on the first run, because while the starvation thing is an issue, like I guess that's the point. There's so many freaking issues going on. Like their other thing that they're immediately worried about is just the rampant radiation sickness and poisoning that is just literally affecting everybody too. So essentially, in the Vulcan logical order of priorities, they're just like, well, people can go a couple days without food, but radiation poisoning could kill you tonight. So they prioritize radiation treatments and then emergency field rationing. And then we're going to see a little bit later kind of the aha moment they have on how they're going to fix the food problem. They actually have a very creative solution to that. I see a super chat.
Bill Treadwell throws in £5. How did you decide on who signed the document, and why did the Vulcans sign sideways?
So the Vulcans signed sideways because I looked online for Vulcan writing, and there's very few official examples of it, and the examples I did find from screen use are very contradictory. Sometimes they write in a Mandarin style, up and down rise, even some books have that, and then also some books and some TV shows they go left to right. So I'm just like, well, it fits better left to right, so we're gonna put it in this way just because it fit better.
You know what they say, the left to right, they're Vulcans from the north.
Okay,
yes.
There you go. And then who signed it is, these would have just been the leaders of the remaining powers that are left on Earth. So
no Cochrane then? You'd think he'd have been
No,
put on the
Cochrane's
list.
not a political leader. And as you guys, we kind of skipped over it a little bit, but when you guys read it, you'll see like Cochrane does not want to be involved in all this. He just wants to go build warp drives and fly warp ships and do warp technology. So he tries to kind of disconnect himself from this like as quickly as he can, because he wants to go do things that he thinks are interesting, and he doesn't think this is very interesting.
So the Vulcans don't necessarily use him as a symbol of this is what you can achieve. They kind of sidestep him a bit because he's not a governmental official.
Only at the beginning. So this whole story is also kind of a story of Zephyr and Cochrane too. And I wish we had all the time to get into this, but like we go through the journey of the character of Zephyr and Cochrane in here, where essentially at the beginning of this story, he's like what I just said. He's like, listen, I'm not a politician. I don't want to do this. I'm a scientist. I'm an engineer. I build warp drive ships. That's what I want to do with the rest of my life.
And drink.
Everybody leave me and drink. Everybody leave me the hell alone. I want to go do that. And
does he get his hookers and his babes and his booze after this? Then I mean, that's
he gets married, but So, to Lily. But to Lily. But what's interesting is we actually see there's some pretty damning repercussions of his behavior with that attitude that he takes on it, and you're going to see that as the story unfolds here. And at the end of it, he kind of comes back and he realizes he's not a politician, he's not a statesman, he's not a diplomat, but he has a role to play in this. And you'll see when he does that, especially in the beginning of chapter 2, that's when we see this massive change in how things are going. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, so let's carry on with the story, and we're going to get to that.
So anyway, I got to say, I like these cargo ships, these Vulcan cargo ships. New design and very neat. So
thank you. Yeah, those have impulse engines on them too. I had some people ask me. One guy, it was really funny when I showed them. He's just like, so they just kind of like dropped off the cargo pods and said, "See you, losers." Like, good luck. And I'm just like, maybe I could have illustrated that a little bit better. Those yellow parts you see on there are little impulse engines. So those are little cargo drone ships essentially that are under power, being controlled from the ship, and they fly down and deliver their cargo, and then they come back up.
Well, it's only logical.
And then we get our part 2, the pains of change. Good old Zephyr and Cochrane there. That's his famous pose from his statue.
He's got a medal, I see. Or is that belt buckle?
That's his belt buckle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like he's got
Yeah. So again, the attention to detail in his first contact outfit here is crazy. Michelle really killed it on this. And I wish we had time to go in all the details, but I really worked hard to flesh out these guys' backstories, because obviously Zephyr and Cochrane had a whole life before we see him in Star Trek First Contact, and we're going to explore a little bit more of it too in Chapter 2. And
well, David, it's this is your 2 hours. So if you want to go into super detail, we'll get to the stuff later.
He had a rough life. I mean, yeah, he had a rough life. he was identified as very smart from a young age, and essentially at the time he was coming of age, based on when he was born, the planet has already gone to hell, right? We have the rise of the augments coming in, we have the rise of the authoritarian dictatorships of the Western Alliance and the Eastern Coalition, and he essentially becomes a state hostage. So a lot of totalitarian regimes in the world right now, they still have scientists and engineers and very bright people working for them, but a lot of times those people obviously aren't doing it by choice. And in Zefram Cochrane's situation, his parents were actually being held hostage by the Western Alliance to force his assistance in developing various weapons programs. And this should come as no surprise to anybody. Two of the things he was involved with was the development of antimatter weapons and the study of subspace, but obviously for violent and war-making purposes, not for peaceful, ideas.
I like that.
So it's fair to say you've given his alcoholism a numbing the pain of a horrendously terrible life is the reason.
He had a really rough life. Like like as bad as things look for him in the post-apocalyptic World War III, that is an infinitely better situation from the hell he was in prior to what we see him as. So I just from a character development standpoint, I really want to highlight that to help explain why he is the way he is.
That's great.
And then we have two more ships on the next page.
I recognize
here.
the bottom vaguely.
I'm a little just my personal feelings on it. Not the best 3D work I ever did. I was just really out of time and I had to put these together quickly, and I didn't want to reuse existing stuff for these two ships. Well, the first one didn't exist prior to this. So the one on top is the Star Dash. That's Zefram Cochrane's second warp ship. And one of the things that we addressed with the Star Dash is it's a little bit more reusable because it's based off of an old technically an old Western Alliance / United States Space Force reusable shuttle that they modified. And we get in a little bit to what the relationship is between Zefram Cochrane in the United States, because his whole Phoenix program was essentially an underground operation, and the United States government was so weakened, especially, it technically it's only a few years old again, right? So a lot of this stuff fell off the radar when the Western Alliance was dismantled, and he was kind of out doing his own thing. So the United States government didn't even know that he had the Phoenix and that he had control of an ICBM side. Like that's how broken society and governance was. And after the United States became aware, obviously they're trying to work with him. So the Star Dash is part of a very early, basically Cochrane and the United States trying to work together. And this relationship does not work out, and they end up going their separate ways because their objectives are very different. And the ship below that is the Valiant, which is a ship that already kind of exists in, I guess, technically in canon. I don't know if we actually see it on screen in its entirety. I know it's referenced on screen, and there's some pictures from some old books that kind of depict something that looks vaguely similar to what I made here. And that was obviously the inspiration for it. And, this is kind of the United States, quote unquote, government's attempt at making their own first warp ship to go around and do things. And there's also another one that we're going to see on the next page in a second that is a Russian and Chinese joint endeavor project. And
Cosmo asked, what about Elon Musk? And if you look, it does say the Musk Corp.
You say what you will about Musk and all of his crazy antics and his running of Twitter and stuff. I don't think this is the place to get into it, but just from a space development standpoint, though, it's pretty hard to sidestep the importance that he's played in the development of 21st century space flight. And I really feel that his, obviously we see the Falcon 9 and the Dragon capsule in use monthly now, right? Which is crazy. We have monthly space flights coming out of the United States again. And then really, in my opinion, the Starship, the big massive cylindrical dildo in Texas, they call it, that huge thing, that's going to change everything in a decade or two when those things are up and running and we have these mass lift orbital vehicles that can get huge amounts of payloads and people into orbit very cheaply, very reusably. Like, I think personally that's when the door to space will begin opening for humanity. So I just want to give some credit to not just to Musk. I think the problem is people focus on him. It's really the thousands of people working for him that are making this happen. It's not like Elon himself is sitting there like, I am Zefram Cochrane and I'm going to change the world. It's the whole team at SpaceX. But anyways, just a little bit of call out to that. And Just want to put that in there.
Perfect. We do have another question from online, actually, which kind of relates to this, I think.
Just gonna hang out for a second.
Andy asks,
I had 3 different drinks. I'm back in 1 second.
okay, Andy asks, why don't we see humans getting back to the moon and Mars in this chapter?
So the short answer to that is there's a huge difference between basically little experimental test vehicles and a sustained colonization effort. So while you could even say it's questionable that humans would be dedicating energy on these projects, considering the condition of Earth at this time, they're still doing it anyways. But there's definitely no public support or even resources or capability to even attempt things like that right now. And there's just not enough of anything for that.
That's fair. Let's see. Well, I'll get to the other questions later if we need to. There's a few more questions from online, so. Actually, is there anything that applies here? Well, Chris H, aka her harms, asks, what role is AI art playing in the Bissigverse content?
So we're using, so here is an example of an AI art piece at the bottom of the screen here. This is the Zevda-Zing, which is a Russian-Chinese reusable space shuttle warp ship concept. And this was essentially something that was being developed in concert to the Phoenix. And what makes the story of the Zevda-Zing so interesting is, and we talk about it a little bit in here, is that these programs were actually under development at the same time. So think of the Zevda-Zing as kind of like the Eastern Coalition's version of the Phoenix, which was also kind of happening underground. Yeah. And there's probably an alternative universe of the Bissigverse out there where something went wrong with the Phoenix and the Zevda-Zing ends up being the first warp ship up in there, and the Russians and the Chinese make contact with the Vulcans before the Americans do.
That's the mirror universe version.
Yeah, that could be a good mirror universe opening introduction there for the Bissigverse. Yeah.
Everyone has soul patches, not goatees.
Yes. And so anyways, we use AI art where it works, and then I like it. I don't want to say it's filler, but it just helps me not have so many walls of text, and art is expensive and I don't have unlimited funds for this, so it helps me fill it in a little bit better. And then unfortunately, just when you look at the long term, right, the AI art will become less useful as we move forward. As we approach more of conventional Star Trek and what we understand Star Trek to be, the AI art will be less useful to us, and we will not be able to get what we need out of it. So I'm using it while I got it, I guess, and helping fill the story in. And I personally, I'm thrilled with some of the results we've gotten out of it, and I'm very excited for what the future of this technology has. And I think there's a huge discord around that right now on the internet, where some people are very for it, some people are very against it. And I'd like to think my project is kind of an example of the middle ground there, where we have artists that we pay good money and respect their work, and still hire people to make this stuff where we need them to make it. But there's other things here that we can generate stuff that's close enough to what we need, and it helps ease a little bit of the stress on the budget, and it's just making fun content for you.
Or in fact closer than what you're envisioning, because it's hard to tell an artist exactly what you want, and they might go through alterations, but if you can just generate that's pretty close, there you go. Or you can find something you don't know you want until you've got it.
And it's great for concept too. So sorry, Stuart, you go. Super chat.
That's all right. Sergeant Montgomery Mako throws in $5. So does the U.S. government bring top secret tech to the table? Do they keep it in-house, leery of the Vulcans and other world governments?
Oh, there you go.
Is there subterfuge going on?
That is an awesome question, because we do talk about that in this section here. So we'll just talk about it now. Is obviously there's a split between the U.S. government and the Zefram Cochrane team, because they're not on the same sheet of music. And Zefram Cochrane, knowing now that you guys know what his past experience was, is very fearful of government intervention in anything, because his family was basically being used as slave labor working for a totalitarian dictatorship called the Western Alliance, which was what replaced the United States at the time. So naturally, he is very not interested in doing anything with any government. It's just not on his to-do list. Inside the American Warp Development Program, which is what runs the Valiant here, we have a schism playing out, a political schism playing out over kind of exactly like what you're talking about right now. You have one section of the American warp development team that wants to share their technology for the betterment of mankind and work peaceably with people, and then you have another section that's like, no, this is ours. Like, we don't, still this old school way of thinking. Like, we don't want the Chinese to get this technology before us because we don't want them to have an advantage over us later, and they're still having this old school thinking, and there's some other things mixed in there too, especially with how they view Earth, where some of those people are like, dude, this whole process is stupid. Earth cannot be saved. We need to get this warp stuff developed, and we need to get the hell out of here. And then there's other people saying, no, we can fix Earth, and we can still use this as our home to grow into this bigger neighborhood.
And that's a good side point. What was the moon colony like, or the Mars colony like, or something? Because if Earth's that diseased, that problematic, you would obviously send people to other planets. What's that level of...
So we'll do a little spoiler, but it's an important question to address. So the whole first section of chapter 2 of this, which is not in what we're talking about, this is all chapter 1, basically addresses what Sam just said. But the long and the short of it is, unfortunately, they're all dead.
Damn Vulcans. Wait. Oh.
Yeah. So the problem became the moon was close enough with some future space-based weapons that it actually did become a conflict zone during the Third World War. And what wasn't destroyed essentially suffered the same fate as Mars, where just they weren't able to get these things to be fully self-sufficient, and without some kind of contact with Earth and supplies and resources, it just couldn't work. And unfortunately, it's kind of a tragedy. We call it the silent sacrifice. And there's monuments built to these people because these were some of Earth's best and brightest that were out there, and not necessarily like the evil people who were destroying everything back home. And unfortunately, when the world annihilated itself, all the satellites went, all the space launch facilities went. I mean, for Christ's sake, because millions of people are starving to death everywhere around the planet. Like, there's hundreds of millions of people are starving. There's no space forces. There's no launch facilities. None of that exists anymore. Like, there's kids that are born after the Third World War that don't even know what Mars is, right? So in America.
But what about the rich?
There's no
though?
school system.
There's still going to be the ultra rich who will have space travel still. They're not going to lose that.
I don't know. I mean, like,
because like you said, they want to get off planet. I mean, you'd think that would be
that's...
number one thing would be to do the tech.
Yeah. Yep. And that's where the Conestoga comes into play. So, because the Conestoga, as we know in canon, we make some changes in the Bissigverse to it. The Conestoga is the end result of the American warp development program collapsing, because basically the half of them that were good people essentially go to work for Zephyr and Cochrane's team, and the other half that have this old school way of thinking and this more negative thought line, they use the Conestoga as kind of their test platform for saying we're leaving. And as you guys know, the history of the SS Conestoga ends very badly on Terra Nova, and we do talk about that in here. And just real quick to address the super chat from Sergeant Montgomery, does my old unit, the 82nd Airborne, still exist? I'm going to say no, because all of those units would have been reconstituted and reflagged under the Western Alliance, because the United States essentially ceased to exist as a state prior to the Third World War, and wars happened. So maybe there's a reconstituted 82nd Airborne, I guess, but like we address in the very few first pages of the story, there's really not a lot of flight-worthy aircraft in the United States inventory anymore, and very few helicopters. So I'm not really sure there's even enough flying hardware to constitute any kind of airborne or air assault elements that could even exist at this point. But good question. I was in the 77th. I was in the 77th Sustainment Brigade at Fort Dix, New Jersey.
But let's reset the poll. We've got 97 votes. It was, what do you think of the NX era of Trek? 39% love it, 33% like it, 20% okay, and 8% meh.
And Devo 77 there, yes, we're we're definitely going to talk about the whole Mako thing here, because Starfleet and the Makos and these organizations, they didn't just show up one day. Unfortunately for Star Trek, that's not how the real world works. Any organization that you've ever heard of in a military sense came out of another organization prior to it. The easiest and fastest example to give you is the United States Army came out of the Continental Army, which was a totally separate entity prior to the inception of the United States. And before that, there was various state militias that were not united in a continental sense, but various state militias that then came together and formed that. So like when you walk backwards, there's all these little stepping stones that get you eventually to the United States Army. And what you're going to see with Starfleet and Mako is essentially the same story, which is what we're going to be telling here, is how do all these other things come together and turn into those. But yeah, so back to the slide at hand, though. So that was an AI art picture of the Zevda. And then we talked a little bit about anti-gravity stuff here. We're going to get way more into this kind of techie stuff in chapter 2. I love and appreciate the fact that we are having some engagement on this, but I also am fully cognizant of the fact that, like, this is a little bit of a tougher sell, right? When you think Star Trek, you don't think economics, geopolitics, and things like that. But unfortunately, this is a groundwork that must be laid for the bigger story to follow. So as we move forward in these books, you're going to see more and more spaceships and more Star Trek and less geopolitical stuff, I guess, for lack of better explanation.
But Stuart, there's a new poll.
Have you ever wondered about the
Stuart,
deep real-world history of Trek?
BJ Tehran, $5. We know the Royal Navy still exists from Malcolm.
We do, and we're actually going to be addressing that. That is actually something that comes up. We hold on to that thought. We're getting there. That is coming up within the next 15 or 20 minutes here.
Yes, we're at the poll, Stuart.
And the new poll is up. Have you ever wondered about the deep, real history of Trek? Yes, all the info. Want, need. Some happy with it.
Well, of course you do. That's why you guys are here. That's what you're here for.
It's just
That's what
a
we're
TV
doing.
show. It's okay.
So anyways, the Conestoga is a massive disaster, and the Zevda Zing is also a massive disaster. Blows up during a flight test, and then we also know from our real Trek canon, the Valiant is also a disaster, and that ship goes missing, right? So, the reason why the section is called the Pains of Change is because Earth is trying to transition from one state of existence to the next, and not all of these things that are happening are going to be a straight line of progress. So a lot of people have it in their minds that, like, well, this was rock bottom, it can't possibly be any worse than this, and things will only improve from here. And that's just not how the real world works. And just looking at the microcosm of the human warp drive development in these early days, a lot of these things were failures, not successes, and a lot of people died doing this. And part of the story we tell here with Zephyr and Cochrane's character development is he eventually kind of comes to the conclusion that the development of warp drive technology and the betterment of the human race and our advancement of a species are very intimately connected. And while Zephyr and Cochrane is not a diplomat, he's not a statesman, and he doesn't want to be, somebody needs to take charge of this process and provide some sort of guidance and some sort of safety rails to it and some direction. Otherwise, everybody's just going to go out and do their own thing. A lot of people are going to die that don't need to die in these accidents. And you also run the risk of, like, well, the Americans have this warp drive and the Chinese have that warp drive, and they won't share technology with each other. And then you just lay the groundwork for eventual conflict later between these powers. Instead of pulling people together, you're laying the seedlings for something that's going to tear them apart again in the future. And it takes him 2 decades to come to this conclusion, by the way. This is not something that happens very quickly with him.
A side question, did you ever consider to add a little meta side narrative about if the Vulcans are such a big power and the Andorians are so anti them and more aggressive in your universe, that the Andorians would have known about Earth and sent some people to one of the side factions to give them warp tech to create a bigger problem for the Vulcans? Or did you want to not get such? So it would be easy for them just to give China, here's a warp drive, here's a phaser, go cause problems. Was that ever a consideration to make it? To
that is absolutely a consideration, and that is part of the Vulcan Protectorate program, there's actually a clause in there that explicitly addresses this, where essentially the Vulcans are the Starfleet for the Sol system right now. So they have a military star base in orbit with a small military fleet of the High Command is stationed there, and out of what's happening here, they have essentially signaled to the Andorians that this is, for all intents and purposes, this is Vulcan territory right now. So Andorian
like
vessels
an armada,
are not...
you build a space station around the planet so that people know it's yours.
Yeah.
Which is the next slide, actually, out of the action.
Yeah, that's a great transition point to the next slide. So you can actually see that space station there in orbit that I built. And the Vulcans would definitely not allow an Andorian vessel into the Sol system at this time because the conflicts going on between their two peoples. And also you have to understand, Earth has extremely limited contact with other races. In fact, at this point, we're talking about right now on this slide, at this stage of the story, it's only with the Vulcans. So it's not like there's other alien races.
Well, and the Ferengi.
Oh, well, not in the Bissigverse.
Oh, yes,
But okay, now I remember what you're talking about with that Deep Space Nine episode, potentially.
Yes,
yeah. Maybe. Okay, maybe. But
sorry, deep cut. I just got a visual of
it's all right.
this, so I was just like, oh yeah.
But yeah, so there's not like some like Rigelian freighters coming, and it so happens to be operating on behalf of the Andorians in clandestine fashion. Like, that's not happening, right? So there is that's why what Solkar did was so important, because he knew if the Vulcans didn't step in and just totally lock this situation down from 0 hour, that exactly what you're talking about could end up happening. Like, imagine if the Andorians made first contact with Earth, and they just said, listen, there's these demonic freaks to the galactic south of you. They're coming to kill you. We're your friends. We have all the weapons and ships and technology you could ever want, and we need your help to go fight them. And going to Earth in its state after World War III, there'd probably be a pretty good argument to make that the humans would be enthusiastic about joining the Andorians in a crusade against the Vulcans, especially if they can be convinced that the Vulcans are coming to wipe them out. So,
did they ever try, or was the power play too much for the Andorians to cope with?
It happened too fast. So the Andorians are aware of Earth, and they're aware of the thermonuclear weapons exchange, as are the Vulcans. So the Vulcans were just kind of doing their...
But I mean, there's a good chunk of time between Vulcans arriving and then normal trek, so
yes,
they might.
Yes.
That's why I said about China. They could just have gone and, or is Vulcan? They're just so far outmatching Andorians that they just can't.
They're similar on terms of technology between each other, the Andorians and the Vulcans. I would say it's very analogous to the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, where one's always trying to like one up the other. Yeah. Oh, there's all sorts of espionage. And the Andorians are going to be aware of what's happened on Earth and know who they are. Like they're going to know what's going on. But like when we look at the galactic maps that are coming in later, things will dive a little bit more into the history between the Vulcans and Andorians, and you'll actually see there's a whole lot of different minor powers all over the place, and some of them are aligned with the Vulcans and some of them are aligned with the Andorians. And for lack of better explanation, the Earth situation is just one of the ones where the Andorians said, all right, well, they beat us on this one. We have like 12 other things like this that we're working on, and we're just going to focus on those efforts. So hopefully that addresses the question.
We got some super chats. So Welder215 throws in €6. I'd like to see more of the Vulcan, other alien perspectives and opinions on humans. Hit like and read the Basicverse, people. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, guys. Wow, that's awesome. Look at these super chats. Oh, guys, I appreciate the crap out of all of you. All 53 of you that are watching right now, and those of you who are super chatting,
Everybody hit like.
It really means the world to me that there's at least one other person interested in this stuff. And again, I know that this is like about as far removed from regular Star Trek as the Bissigverse will get. And I was kind of worried, like Sam, like we weren't going to get any super chats going into this, but here we are, man. They're rolling in, and I appreciate the crap out of all of you. So thank you.
And it could be 50 people who are doing alt accounts, but I don't think so. I think you got 50 people. I think you are.
Yes.
Something potato. I put in £5.
Thank you.
I've always loved the deep real world stuff on Trek. It's my favorite part of DS9, and getting to see it realized in the Bissigverse is fantastic.
Thanks.
Probably
Thanks,
quite
Mr.
surreal as
Potato.
well.
Yeah, this is, it's all about me taking my real world military and geopolitical and experiences and being a history major and a student of all sorts of different types of history and a lover of science, and just finding a way to mash all this together with all this creative stuff that just keeps flowing out of my head.
And Terrence mentions, sort of to go off the Andorian thing of Earth not being important enough. What do you think made the Vulcans think Earth is important enough to use an entire fleet, or do the Vulcans have thousands of ships, so it really wasn't a big deal? It was just, we have 30 spare.
So,
because it seems like a relatively large operation for any race in the next era.
Yes.
Why Earth?
So, I have to answer that question with another question directed at you, Sam. If I hit screen share right now, what is going to happen? Does my face go away?
Everything would break, yes.
Everything would break? Okay,
yep.
So I have a galactic map that I'm making.
You can send to me on Facebook, though, and I can put it on if you would like.
All right. Hold, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Stuart, Van.
I send a screen.
Vote on the poll, hit the like button. Do the things you guys know. And Super Chat. Go check out the book. Skim ahead. See if you have any questions for David. And we will get to those at the end. We'll probably have one or two questions from online at the end, just to kind of throw at him, because I don't know where to fit them in necessarily here. So, but yeah.
So that's one picture. Sam, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit here. Yeah, I'm gonna. So you can pull that first one up, Sam, and then I will bang a bigger one to you here. So we'll start with the first one and then just go to the second one real quick after that. All right, so assuming Sam will be able to get that on the screen for you, the picture should hopefully speak for itself as to what the situation is here in the Alpha Quadrant in 2065.
Second, David. I want a special thank you to CJ, who joined the channel at the rank of Federation Council.
What?
Big deal. So thank you so much, CJ.
Let's go, CJ.
Oh, it just appeared on my thing. Oh, sure.
That means you get a starbase or a space station or something in our fleet video.
Oh my god.
So thank you so much. That is amazing.
I'd have to name a character after him. We'll see.
Well, no, your first child.
Okay,
it's a very, very high perk, you see.
Understood.
Gosh, please say some words. Have an encore to that welcome to the everything. And hopefully you'll stay around for Stranger Worlds, because you'll be right there. And isn't that also a level where you're in all the different ship plaques?
You're on every plaque, yes, and you also have your own starbase and our space station.
So you'll want to keep watching us all the time, because as people join as captains and admirals, there'll be new things rolling in, so you have to collect the plaques. Damn.
Nice.
Amazing. Put some comments down. Spam us with hello and thank you and welcome. And
yes. You get a free question out of that for sure.
Yes, a free question.
But yeah, so real quick, that map of Earth that is up on the screen right now, you see a little green dot there because there is a Vulcan military outpost there. And this is a huge galactic map I'm working on. Don't worry, we will be getting it to you. We don't really need it per se until we're talking about the Earth-Romulan War in great detail, but it's coming along, and it is massive, and it is stupidly detailed. It's going to be hopefully, knock on wood, the largest and most impressive Star Trek map anybody's ever put together by the time we're done with this.
You say impressive or oppressive?
Both. So
impressive.
It'll be both. It'll be impressively large and impressively detailed. And then, Sam, if you go to the second picture, then now that we've just kind of shown what that looks like, you will see where Earth sits in a geopolitical sense in terms of the conflict between Andoria and Vulcan. I have to wait on my side because I don't know when it's up. Or Sam, tell me when it's good.
Yeah. Guys, hit that like button. We have 60 people watching, 56 likes, so we can do better.
So so what you guys will see is this is still under construction. The green is Vulcan planets, the blue is Andorian stuff. It's not finished, it's not 100% filled in. But you see where Earth is located there. So there's powers up to the north. You have Dralax, you have Tenebia. These are places you've heard of. They're in Star Trek Enterprise. You see places like Alpha Centauri and Vega and stuff like that. They're grayed out because they're like not, in they don't colonize yet. They don't exist at this and at first contact time. But this is what the galaxy looks like at first contact. And you'll see across the map, there's some blue dots and some green dots on some unaligned worlds there. Those are Vulcan and Andorian military presences on those systems and in those other powers. And there's a whole lot more than what you're seeing here. And when you look at where Earth is located, directly above Axanar and Kefaria, those two states are critically important to the Vulcan geopolitical alliance that's going on here. And where Earth is positioned, let's say that went to the Andorians, you could then draw a line straight from Andoria up into Earth, which then puts them in striking distance of both of those powers. And then at this time, Tellarites and the Vulcans are also partners. That little yellow dot you see all the way on the end there, that's one of the closest Tellarite worlds to Earth. That also puts the Andorians in striking distance of the Tellarites, who also have issues with the Andorians. So when you look at it like this, if the Andorians got a hold of Earth, that also cuts off the Vulcans from Dralax and Tenebia, who are their allies beyond Earth. So this creates, I know space isn't flat, but just, work with me here. That puts the Andorians that would have put the Andorians in a very, very bad spot to really mess the Vulcans up if they had gotten in there. So,
and just a quick answer: how many ships do you see each faction having, Andorians and Vulcans? Just very quick answer.
Probably in the hundreds.
Okay.
I would say, yeah.
Devo77X says, "Remember, we lost contact with our first colony." Do you want to address that one?
Terra Nova, you mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, just going
back. Is it the
back
same as the universe as it is in Enterprise? I guess.
Yes, and we just add a wee bit more to it. So the little bit more that we add to it is that the people who are going out on this voyage at the beginning are really not some of the best people around involved in the process. And then basically one of the things we talk about is some of the issues between humanity and Vulcan, and some things that weren't exactly done as well as they could have been. And one of those things we talk about is Vulcan exchange of information to humans, and it's very limited and it's very phased, and they're very selective with what they say. And this Terra Nova story is an example of like, man, if the Vulcans had said XYZ things, this probably all could have been avoided, because the system that we call Terra Nova is the Cassiops system for the Tellarites, and they've already been there, and they say, hey man, this is not a place you want to be. Like, nobody should colonize this stuff. Everybody stay the hell away from this. And the Vulcans know that, but this information didn't get relayed to the humans. And, the Vulcans really weren't clued into what was going on, because, again, the group of the Conestoga, these were the I don't want to share stuff with you group of people. So the Vulcans didn't really even know what was going on with this. And the planet is screwed because it's surrounded by all these free radical, highly irradiated asteroids. And as the crew was screwed from the minute they entered orbit of the world, because they got so irradiated and they didn't even know it. It was actually already making them sick and basically mentally ill. So when we talk about a lot of the irrational subspace behavior we see happening, essentially it is later discovered like, oh wow, like this is what went so wrong here. In addition to them already being a bunch of basket cases anyways, like this really, they were screwed the moment their ship arrived in orbit of the planet. And then, if the Vulcans had known this was happening and had shared this information to the humans, perhaps this whole situation could have been avoided.
Perfect.
So, yes. But I think now if we go back, we're moving right along. We can go to the picture of Lily. Fantastic picture of Lily Sloan.
Mm-hmm.
So again, just fantastic work with, they look exactly like who they're supposed to be. I just can't say enough about Michelle's art. And the backstory of Lily Sloan was something I really wanted to expand upon, because all we know about her is the famous line of, it took me a month to get all that titanium together for the freaking cockpit. That is the extent of the backstory we have on this character, who in First Contact not gone down with 24th century intervention. She would have been on the Flight of the Phoenix with him, because she is the pilot. She's one of the main pilots for this thing. So
if anything, in the post First Contact version, which is not obviously your version, she's actually less important in history than the original version, where she was super important. So Picard accidentally made her like 7th tier versus 2nd tier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So
Then she marries Zephyr Cochrane in this version. So hey.
Yes, and she does end up marrying Zephyr Cochrane in this version too. But you know, her backstory is she was in many ways a similar situation to Zephyrin, where she was basically forced into military service by the Western Alliance. She was a pilot. She was a major war hero, a very well-known war hero pilot. She's got a lot of. She was a fantastic flyer, great aviator, very smart person. But she had a good conscience about her. She was not really an inherently violent person, and you know she takes steps to actively undermine the totalitarian governments that she is being forced to fight for, essentially. And one of the things that she gets involved with before World War III destroys, you know, all of planet Earth is Zephyr Cochrane is kind of working on this underground secret thing where he's like, hey, I think we're all going to die really soon. I have this project that I'm working on, and you and me kind of seem to be on the same wavelength with things. I want to bring you into what we're doing here so we all don't get blown up by a thermonuclear bomb. And basically Zephyr Cochrane's initial, I know he makes his jokes about dollar signs and monies, but you also have to understand escaping the planet is also part of his rationale behind this, because he thinks we're all going to die in a nuclear holocaust. So the way these two actually come into contact with the Western Alliance is Zephyr Cochrane is working on a bunch of fancy weapon systems, and some of them are manned weapon systems going into space, and Lily Sloan is basically being used as a test pilot for some of those weapon systems that he's developing. So these two kind of get put together like that, and then they're able to develop this relationship, and Lily actually plays a critical role in securing the missile silo that Zephyr uses, and right like at the 11th hour when they're making this kind of crazy movie thriller escape away from the nuclear detonations, she actually is able to successfully delete that existence of that nuclear facility off the record books. So when the United States government and she couldn't have known this was going to happen, but when the United States government comes into power again later, they have no idea it was there. So that's one of the things that I wanted to add in there. So she's a fascinating character. I really liked writing about her and her backstory, and she's just one of those things, like you said, Sam, where like this is a person who really played a massive role in the history of humanity at this point, and she got extremely sidelined by the events of the movie. So.
And just a side note for me, I from the movie, I have no sense of her age. I always thought of her as a daughter figure to Cochrane because she felt so much younger. I just did some Googling. She was 44 in the movie. I would have said early 30s.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of shocked. So what age were you thinking of First Contact, or going just with actress age?
Same age as Zephyrin, and then you also have to remember
he looks
Zephyr Cochrane
decades older than her.
Alcohol will do that to you.
So first off, he's an alcoholic, but secondly, there's actually a little bit of in-universe explanation for that, where he was already somewhat. I think the in-universe explanation, he somewhat already had some radiation sickness going on that would aged him prematurely, and then in the Bissigverse here, he's been asked to work on a lot of really dangerous stuff and a lot of things that are very unhealthy to be around. And it's taken a toll on his body physically, which is why he appears older than he really is. Because you guys, you know, just a general audience, like people who do a lot of smoking or are unfortunate and have like drug addiction problems and just exposed to really awful stuff like this routinely, it ages you. Like you can end up looking way older than you actually are, and that's essentially part of what you see happening with Zephyr Cochrane.
Because real ages, he was 56, she was 44. And he looks in his 60s, she looks in her 30s to me. So I kind of shocked they married, because like I say, it always was a daughter vibe to me in the movie.
Yeah, Cochrane's younger.
I mean, you
than
could be
he
into
looks.
that. I mean, hey,
So,
you know.
No, Cochrane's just a lot younger than he looks. He's just had a really horrifying life, unfortunately. And he has to be younger than he looks too, because if he's not younger than he looks, then there's no way I can make the first opening episode of frickin' Star Trek Enterprise make any sense, because Cochrane would have been like 200 years old in the opening when they dedicated the Warp 5 complex in the year. I think it was like 2112, I want to say they did that. He would have been like 170 years old then. So we
Look,
had to,
if Walt Disney can be kept in cryostasis, so can Cochrane, okay?
Yeah.
Well,
Just thaw 'em out for special occasions.
Exactly. Every new
Now,
ship.
the next page has quite an interesting character on it that I
it
want to learn
does.
about.
I'm very excited about this one, and you guys should be too. So, if anybody, hopefully, we have some people in the audience who like to read the beta canon books and stuff like that. Because God knows there's 1,000 of them in Star Trek, and some of them are really well written, and some of them aren't. But
There are Transformers crossovers.
Yes, we're not going to go there. So there are a race of insectoid peoples called the Kefarians, and they actually are
I remember those from previous book. It all links together.
Yeah, and they were in the Atlas book we looked at. Yeah, we see them a lot in the books, right? And they're kind of well developed already in the sense of like what this race is. So I didn't really have to invent anything too terribly much with them. I had to put some detailed dressing on it. But these guys are basically bug farmers. They're very peaceful people, and like we talked about it in the Atlas book a little bit, where they're not really like their contribution to the Federation and to the coalition of planets war effort that they're a part of prior to that is more of a humanitarian and food aid essentially, and more of a healer, not a killer role. This species is part of the Vulcan Protectorate program, same as Earth, so they're in the Vulcan umbrella. Think of the I don't know why I didn't say this earlier. Think of the Vulcan Protection Protectorate thing is kind of like NATO. So Vulcan's the United States, and then you have all these other nations under their umbrella in NATO, and then you have Andoria is the Soviet Union, and then all their friends are like Warsaw Pact is essentially the way I would explain that. I should have probably said that an hour ago, but whatever. And the Vulcans understand they have a short-term fix. Here's a whole bunch of rations and stuff. And they have a long-term fix. They're like, hey, we're fixing all the soil in Earth, and this time 100 years from now, nobody's even going to remember that this is what the planet used to look like, and you'll be totally food self-sufficient again, in 50 or 60 years. But there's the medium-term problem, right? So the emergency food rations for 60 years is not really a good plan, and there's nothing they can do to speed up the soil reclamation. So they happen to have a member of their alliance who are expert farmers. They can make anything grow anywhere. They're one of the largest food exporters in the quadrant, and they're like, hey, Earth needs you and what you do right now. And basically the Vulcans broker this introduction between the powers of Earth and the Kefarians, and they establish a trading relationship where they're importing lots of food from the Kefarians, and they're also bringing in Kefarians to help speed up the restoration process and get better ways of farming and stuff like that. So these guys are essentially helping fix Earth too.
Now, is this something that will be, get the civilians away from the areas? Because can people deal with, Vulcans are people with pointy ears. They've never had elves for their entire lives in storybooks, but seeing walking, talking, clicking ant creatures, or is it a secret? Because most of the world we know who Vulcans are potentially, or is it just, yep, we're Vulcans now, we've got ant people.
So this is part of the growing. This is part of the growing story with humanity, right? Because what you're saying is a very real thing, and we address that in here, where the appearance of these guys can be very frightening to humans. And the leadership of Earth at the time is also aware of this and goes out of their way to be seen with these people and to try to normalize them to humanity and say, listen, like, life comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and different types of people everywhere. Yeah, these guys are big bugs, but they're here to help us. They're trying to get us more food. They're trying to prevent you from starving. And what the interactions that humans are having with them and seeing on their TVs, right, is of these quote unquote scary bug people basically delivering emergency food aid and preventing people from starving all over the place. So it's extremely positive.
They're feeding us to fatten us up so they can.
That's an extremely positive image of these guys being shown, and that has a profound impact on the future development of Earth society, because the first kind of scary looking creature that we're introduced to are these guys, but the exposure that humanity has to them is this overwhelmingly positive one. So it sets the groundwork for building a more understanding society and moving forward.
Bill Treadwell says, what does Earth pay the Kefarian with?
So the way that would work is nothing, because this is a deal being brokered on behalf of the Vulcans. So the Vulcans are obviously compensating them in some manner for what they're doing, but there is no direct here's what Earth can trade for the food concept happening out. It wouldn't. There would be nothing for them to give. But the Kefarians are an extremely compassionate people, and this is something that's been very well documented in many books written before I ever got involved with any of this. That they are well known for being a very understanding and compassionate people. So they love doing this kind of stuff. This is a main, and in the Atlas book I wrote, we talk about that too. Like, this is kind of a main driving point of how their society functions, is doing stuff like this.
And speaking of barely functioning society, the argumentative people are next.
Yeah.
The reverse of said other page.
Yes. So the Tellarites. So in Star Trek canon, the introduction of the Tellarites is a little clunky in terms of how their relationship goes with
Dave, as long as
Earth.
it's not McClunky, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, McClunky. I know where that's from.
You got one.
So,
Good.
The Tellarites in Star Trek Enterprise, they basically advertise it as if humans, I guess, know what a Tellarite is, but have no experience in dealing with a Tellarite. And I personally don't think that made a whole lot of sense. You don't even have to go into my book for this. You can just use the existing canon material in Star Trek Enterprise. That there's some things in there that I think clearly contradict that. To me, the number one thing with that is in the Carbon Creek episode, when the Vulcans go back to the 1950s and stuff, the only reason they get rescued is because there was a Tellarite freighter nearby that detected what was going on and relayed the information to the Vulcans. So the Tellarites are operating in this area of space, and they're going to be aware of humanity. They've already fought, and in Enterprise, right, this is already established, they fought a war against the Andorians, which de facto puts them on the Vulcan camp at this point in the Bissigverse. And the Vulcans and the Andorians, the Vulcans and the Tellarites are two totally separate powers. I wouldn't say like the Tellarites are like part of this space NATO that the Vulcans are making, but they're allies, right? They're on the same sheet of music in a big strategic political sense. And the Tellarites also are closer to Earth too. They have people who are settling worlds that are increasingly ever closer to Earth. And if Earth is about to blow up and become this big spacefaring power, the Tellarites want to have good relations with them. And Tellarites are an extremely misunderstood race, and this is something that I've actually spent some time already writing and stuff that hasn't been released publicly yet. But the people see Andorians, I think, argumentative pig people, right? And they don't understand why. They're just like, oh, this is just how the Tellarites are. And in Tellarite history, they go through this period of time called the Voice Wars, which is essentially Earth's or Tellarite's version of World War III, essentially. And what ends up coming out of that is no Tellarites are ever allowed to fight each other ever again, but what they do is they argue over everything, and arguing is kind of like a sport, and to them arguing is the highest form of civil expression, because we're doing this instead of killing each other, is the way the Tellarite mind works. So and not all Tellarites are just like nasty, like they like their arguing and stuff too. It's an important part of their culture for that reason, but like it's not like everything is like a combative adventure with them. And the Tellarites have many reasons for wanting to be friends with Earth, considering how their space borders are kind of moving closer to each other. So they dispatch some people to go meet with them, again brokered through the Vulcans. And the Tellarites are very economically minded, and they're thinking big picture here. They're like, yeah, Earth is a crap basket right now, but in 100 years from now, they're going to probably be a very major player in the region here, and we want to have good economic ties with these people. So they're kind of lubricating the road ahead of them for the future to have good relations with Earth by getting involved in Earth's reconstruction in their way. And the Tellarites are also known for being good engineers and good miners and resource extractors, and that's one of the ways they help here. And this particular character here, Oram Pakat, he is a huge figure in getting Earth's asteroid mining and space recolonization efforts off the ground and moving, and helping Earth become more economically self-sufficient. Sorry, I know that was a long one. I'll
That's
shut
all
up for a
right.
sec.
Right. You actually learned some stuff. That was good.
Um,
All right.
and hey guys, real quick, I'll take another super chat plug here. Again, blown away by the support that we have gotten so far from some of you guys. I appreciate all of you and thank you all. But you know, we still got about 30 or so minutes left, so hopefully we can still oink out. See, you can see what I did there. Oink out because Tellarites.
Yeah, gotcha.
A few more super chats before we
We
close
won't
out.
argue with anybody that wants to super chat. Let's put it
Yes,
that way.
unless you super chat that you want us to argue with us, in which case we will argue with you if that's what you're paying us to do. So it's up to you.
I want to ask the one question from Subraxis. Do these Tellarites have 5 or 3 fingers on each hand, and do they have hooves on their feet?
So
Which version of Tellarite?
These Tellarites have 5 fingers. You can see in the picture there, he has a regular hand, and they have the exposed bone on the knuckles as seen in Star Trek Enterprise. For the species development here, we lean more towards how these guys are portrayed in Star Trek Enterprise when there's some kind of conflict in their appearance, just for sake of explaining that to people. And then, like, when you see Andorians later, like, their Andorians are going to look like the Star Trek Enterprise Andorians, not like the Star Trek Discovery Andorians. So things like that. And same thing with the Tellarites. Like, they show you Tellarites in Discovery 2, and they're very radically different from what we've seen prior. So, yeah. But yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to part 4, the Crisis of 2077. Something to look forward to, everybody.
Yeah, and
before we do that, though, hold on. Got a potato super chat again. 5 pounds. On a related note, reviving a question asked earlier, what happened with transitioning away from money to no money?
So, all right, I guess.
Well, they still had money Enterprise because they bought drinks at the Earth Bar.
And
Make it as shorter answer as
say,
possible so we can cover all this other stuff.
They literally say in the last episode of Star Trek Enterprise, I'll bet you a week's pay. So the United Earth government still has money. So the short answer is there is no non-money transition. And the second short answer is the Bissigverse will not be subscribing to that nonsensical economic platform because you can only do that in a post-scarcity economy, and you cannot have a post-scarcity economy until every single house has an antimatter powered replicator in it, which you will not have for many hundreds and hundreds of years, even in the most optimistic sense of things. So there always will be some sort of space economy happening in the Bissigverse.
So you think Picard got what, 2 million a year, 3 million a year, plus health benefits?
You'd have to account
dental.
for 300 years of inflation too. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
So that might actually
$200,000
be
an
his paycheck. He might actually be making $200 million an hour, but that might just buy him a hot dog in 2409. I don't know.
So Guidon's there to make a few bucks now in your version. She's there because you know she can charge more on the flagship.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
so the Crisis of 2077 does 2 things, and this is why I included this in this, because this is 3 things. This is an example of a step backwards, where we have all these good things happening, right? Aliens are coming to help rebuild. Earth is getting its act together. Warp drive development is having issues, but it's progressing. But here's the first major step backwards. And that was number 1. We have to show this can go both ways. Step number 2 is this was such a massive part of existing Star Trek canon, it would have probably been frowned upon if I ignored it. And what I'm referring to is, Next Generation, first episode, when Q takes them back to the post-apocalyptic courts of Earth, and he says that United Earth nonsense is dealt with. These are the courts of the year 2077. So is the words that come out of his mouth. So I would say, okay, how could I realistically make that statement make any sense? And I found a way to do it. And it is called the Crisis of 2077, which we will be exploring in a second here. And the Crisis of 2077 is also used as the final link we need in the chain that gets us from the world is on fire to we have a United Earth government. This is the event that makes that click. And over here is what you understand as the United Earth government and Star Trek moving forward. So that's why this had to be in there. So it starts off with a series of terrorist attacks on various installations that are part of the new United United Nations Council, NUNC, that you're going to see referenced in here, which is kind of not the world government. Their individual countries still exist and have dominion over their own sovereign territories. This is just the replacement to the UN, essentially, that coordinates with the Vulcans.
Well, not to briefly just derail slightly, since you said a minute ago there was, if everyone's starving, then everyone's dying because you can only live without food so long. I mean, are we down to like 2 billion, 3 billion people? Because you're not going to make new people if you can't feed your kids. If all the kids have died from malnutrition, if half the adults have died, I mean, what are we down to? 1 billion, 2 billion?
I don't have an exact number, but in Star Trek First Contact, they say it's 600 million people dead. That number has been revised in the Bissigverse to closer to 3 billion dead. So there's been
a feed them, you're losing millions a year just from that.
So there might have been 600 million casualties in the thermonuclear exchange, but there probably would have been literally 2 to 2.5 billion people perished in the aftermath of that, with the world essentially falling apart.
And you said there were no main governments, which implies there's no real infrastructure. You can't have the space of Russia and it feeding itself because there's no way of transporting food. So most Russians are going to be dead. Most Indians are going to be dead. Yeah, everyone in Vegas is going to be dead. I mean, it's going to be all these swaths that you have to power. They're all dead.
Yep. And your soil is contaminated. There's no gasoline for your tractors to run.
But Elon Musk lived, apparently, despite 3 or 4 billion people dying. Musk still lived.
His company did.
Well, it's named after him, though.
But
so he had to be alive and found the company.
Made it before the war, though. So
yeah, he became famous before the war. He's famous in the year 2018, so he's going to be famous before that. Yeah, but just to move along with this real quick, our main enemy baddies here is the Terran Front, and these guys are basically a remnant holdover of the Eastern Coalition, and they are basically kind of what you talked about. Like, if the Andorians were able to get into Earth and cause problems, these are the guys they would have gone to do that. And in Star Trek Enterprise, there's an organization, God, I can't remember what the name of it is. In the last 3 episodes, they make a big terrorist attack play. For the life of me, I can't remember what their organization is called, but it's not the same name as the organization that I'm using here, but in universe, that other organization, once I remember the frickin' name of it, traces its origin back to this one that we're writing about here. So there's a linkage.
Before we move on, we're going to the super chat, though, from Verpine, which kind of goes back to one of the other pictures. $5, he says, so are the Kefarians 4 or 6-limbed, and are they predatory or vegan? There have been a lot of contradictions in the beta canon regarding them.
So the quick answers is they have six limbs. You see it in the picture there. He's got his little extra arms there folded in underneath of it. So they are 6 limbs. And I think overwhelmingly they are vegetarian / healthy eater people, but that's not a biological trait. That's a societal trait. So there will be Kefarians that eat meat. But, on average,
Kefarivores
do not. Yes, sure. But yes, hopefully that answers that. Good question, Verpine. But yeah, so the Terran Front opens up the salvo, and their goal is essentially to try to tear down the new United Earth or new United Nations Council. They want to stop all this alien stuff. They basically want to seize the alien technology for their own and make their own path, right? How many times have we seen this story play out before? But it's an important story that would play out. If not everybody on Earth is going to be on the same sheet of music in terms of the path forward. And these are very violent, nasty people, and we kind of get a taste of what this kind of organization is like when you hear stories about Colonel Philip Green and stuff like that they've referenced in the back. Colonel Philip Green is very similar to this individual who runs the Terran Front, but he was in the Western Alliance. He was part of what used to be the United States, and he's actually in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise, believe it or not. There is actually a brief snippet of him giving a speech, and that is referenced in our book here, where Colonel Philip Green kind of came to power after the Third World War because he was one of the last leadership positions left of the Western Alliance, and he gets dismantled in the Second American Revolutionary War, where they finally stamp out the Western Alliance and reestablish the United States government. That is basically the American rebels fighting Colonel Green and dismantling what's left of the Western Alliance in America. But a similar process to that happened in China, but obviously not to the same extent. and part of that is playing out here, where there was still some pretty significant remnants of the Eastern Coalition around that just weren't going to play ball with everything that was going on, and this was the end result of that. And this is where some of the new AI art was shown in. So just as a real quick thing, you guys, in a few pages, you're going to see a drawn picture of kind of our main hero character here, General Yusuf Had Aliyeva. It's an Azerbaijani last name, if anybody was wondering. And that was a character that my artist drew up. Totally just invented this person. This person doesn't exist. There's multiple photographs of this person in this book. This is not a real human being. This was just an AI construction of her picture. So every time you see a real photo of him, that is not a real photo of a person that exists, and that photo was not photoshopped. It just never happened. It never existed in the first place. That's all AI art.
For those interested, what's the AI art again, to remind people?
It's Midjourney is what I'm using, and this Chapter 1 was mostly made with V4, a little bit of V5 in there. Chapter 2 will be all V5 stuff. So
and how much does that cost? What sort of price range is that?
Well, I believe the membership, there's 3 different tiers of membership. I'm on the mid-range one. It's like $24 a month or whatever. And, you know, it's so fun to just mess around with it. Like, there's so many just fun parts of AI art that, you know, you can get lost in it for hours just generating who the heck knows what. You can make whatever you want. It's just fun. But I'm using it to help proliferate storytelling, so that's what I do with it. And then from a slightly more artistic standpoint, if we go down a slide, we have the leader of the Terran Front, Lee Kuan there. The picture of him on a TV address, that's also AI art. That was not done by one of my artists. We used her artwork as a set piece, and I say, go paint me a picture of this guy based off of what she drew, and that's what we got. Same thing with that UN council there. That UN chamber is not real. That's AI art. But anyways, what ends up happening is the new United Nations Council essentially starts putting together a security task force, because they don't have an army. They have the Royal Navy. They have various other institutions that still semi-exist around planet Earth right now. And they start taking these things saying, well, the Brits have a navy. They have some warships that can still sail. The Americans have some planes and some tanks. The Russians have a shitload of infantry, right? And they say, let's put this together in a cohesive fighting force. And we're going to call this the United Nations Council Security Force. And we're going to use this as our fighting force against the Terran Front, because the Vulcans are bound by the treaty that we saw 2 hours ago. They can't get involved in this. This is a human-to-human conflict. The Vulcans can only get involved if an outside power attacks Earth. So they're bound by treaty and ethics to not get involved. So this is a huge risky moment for Earth, because if the Terran Front succeeds, or just succeeds enough, they can destroy this whole thing. And the Tellarites and the Vulcans and the Kefarians will pull out from Earth, and the aid will stop, and the soil reclamation will come to an end. And, you know, the Earth will be back to square one if these guys succeed in what they're doing here. Because, again, the Terran Front, they want to seize all the alien hardware stuff. They just want to take it for themselves and, you know, not conform to the restrictions being imposed upon them from the outside. And in addition to reasserting a more authoritarian regime, because people are scared and there's so much happening. We need strong leadership right now, and this can only be provided through the Iron Fist. And there are people and sections of the planet, even in this time frame, that are receptive to that message, because you have to understand, the Vulcans can't get everywhere all at once. That's the problem. And there's going to be people who are going to feel left out by this and behind, and they're going to be sympathetic to this message, because the Vulcans, they just can't get to everybody at once.
Well, Classic for real throws in $2 though. How do you think Enterprise would have ran with Colonel Green?
Are you asking if Colonel Green was like in the show as a character? Like, I'm afraid I don't 100% understand the question.
I don't either.
But they reference him as a genocidal maniac in the show. When they do talk to him, and in TOS, he's literally a psychopathic murderer. So
not great.
I think he would probably be something like that. So probably not somebody you want to have command of a starship. So,
So the next slide, you've got
anyways,
3 other pictures. I mean, the
yes.
bottom one looks shockingly real. Is that real, or is that a...
all AI art. That is not real. Not real people, not Photoshop, just AI art. And a series of battles ensue. And the reason why this story is really important, and I wish we had more time to really get into it, because this is really important for the future formation of Starfleet.
As I said before, you're welcome to go into it, but we're going to have to stop at the time, so you can do part 2 later or burn through it. Up to you.
We'll just keep moving through it. It's just, this is one of the important organizations that is those predecessors, right? State militias to Continental Army to the U.S. Army, right? This is that state militia phase where you have these various groups of people being thrown together and going to go fight under one banner, essentially. And then we talk about some of the battles and how the war progresses, and then we have some more AI art here. And there's the actual picture you'll see of the general that was originally drawn for him that we then used as inspiration for the AI art. And then the only other fun note to call out here is some of the old TOS fans might recognize the name Edith Keeler from the episode where Kirk and Spock and McCoy get thrown back in time in the 1930s.
City on the Edge of
City on the Edge of Forever. Yep. Thank you. Sorry. That's why you're here, because I can't retain all that. It's a very famous Star Trek episode. It's one of the most famous of all Star Trek episodes, I think. And there's a name call out here because there's something called the Prosperity Podcast, and it's part of this big it's like this big messaging media campaign that the UN essentially puts out on Earth to counter the hate messaging from the Terran front. And one of the main leaders of that is a guy named Simon Keeler, who is going to be like the great-great-grandson of Edith Keeler from City of the Edge of Forever, basically pontificating the exact same message, because Kirk said it's the right message at the wrong time.
Can you go to the next picture? I think that's where the podcast thing is happening.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I didn't realize we didn't switch over, but it harkens back to Kirk's quote saying it's the right message at the wrong time, and I just wanted to tie into that because it's the right message at the right time, and I thought it would be fitting to have a Keeler delivering it. So, because I love pulling random things like that together, and then some armored vehicles, the general speaking, and this is again just talking about how the war progresses and the impacts that it's having on society, because while there's a threat that it can tear everything apart, there's also the reverse of that where it's also helping pull other things together. And then if we go to the next slide, we get this big pretty flag, and the actions of the United Nations Security Forces fighting as a unified force, the Prosperity Podcast and its associated political messaging that's happening, they eventually defeat the Terran front, and in the process of doing that, a lot of the remaining divisions around the countries on Earth at the time get absolved, and it brings these functioning groups much closer together. And more importantly, not the state government, like forget the governments for a second, the individual peoples of Earth, it starts changing their perspective on things, because they look at this and they're like, wow, we came this close to going back to the way things used to be, and like now that we see there's actually an opportunity to go a different direction with this, is like, no way in hell are we going back to that. And this is where you really see the individual human start retooling how they think about this stuff. And ultimately the United Nations Council decides that at the end of this war, that the UN Council, this isn't the way we do this. We need something bigger. We need something grander that can tackle these issues and really pull the planet together in one cohesive entity. And that's where the idea for the United Earth Government gets born. And then we'll talk about it in chapter 2, but basically they start in the year 2080 working on this, and they have a sunset date of 2089 where they'll have this transition from the old way of doing things into this new thing. And other organizations are going to come out of it, like the United Earth Space Probe Agency, the United Earth Aero Nav Forces, the predecessor to the MACOs, and this is where you'll see that connective tissue now between the crap that I'm throwing into your faces and what you see in Star Trek Enterprise. This was the messy groundwork that had to be laid so I could begin the transition into that. Yeah, this was chapter 1, folks. And we have a super chat, and then we also have some ships. And I know Sam wants to look at the ships before we're done here.
Subraxis throws in 20 pounds, so thank you so much. That is awesome.
Ooh.
Economy, as we know it today, got erased in Star Trek universe during the nuclear holocaust of World War III, 2049 to 2053, in a fashion similar to the one we saw at the end of Fight Club. Some form of currency survived, though. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Remember, we don't talk about Fight Club, though, so be careful.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We can't.
So we can't really say anything else on that.
I want to ask here then, if this is a positive moment in 2083, what was the sort of state of the mass world death famine? Like, was everyone fed at this point? Was that stabilized? When was that stabilized? Because that was something you said right at the start. We haven't really come back to that.
It's continuously improving, right? So it's not 100% stabilized at this point, because like it's not like they snapped the finger and United Earth government was created. Like, this is going to take decades, because it, like, you have to remember, individual nations are still being reconstituted as we go here. We actually addressed that in the thing, right? Like, right before the bombing of 2077, the nation of Japan was just reinstituted as a functional country, like 2 weeks beforehand, and they had him hosted at San Francisco to congratulate for the reemergence of the nation state of Japan coming into existence. So as areas are stabilized, governments are being reformed, communities are coming back together, and infrastructure is getting rebuilt. But it's just can't happen everywhere all at once, and some areas of the world that's going to happen sooner than others.
If the Vulcans were there to explicitly bring about not world starvation, I mean, if this is if this is 5-6 years later, I mean, how are they just being slow? Do they stop? Because surely they have a literal multi planetary force. They should be able to, you would think, supply food to everybody in just forms of tablets. I mean, this is tech that's been long since done on Vulcan, I'm sure. So there shouldn't. Why would anybody be in famining if the Vulcans are working at full speed? And we saw a giant fleet in a space station. Why are they still famine if it's that?
I would say it's significantly improved. I'm not going to say it's been totally went. So perhaps a clarification on some of the terms. Then, I don't think anybody's starving to death anymore in the year 2080. But Earth is not food self-sufficient, so it is 100% dependent on either the Kefarian food supplies or the monthly Vulcan shuttle that lands in your village and distributes your food packets.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
So there's a technical definition of between starvation and famine. So you would say that the Earth is still in a famine at that time because they're not able to provide their own food, just to be clear. But that doesn't mean people are starving to death in the middle of the streets anymore. But that's a good point you bring up. It's important to draw that distinction.
Because Earth would need to be stable. You can't really think about larger themes if your kids are dying every other day from malnutrition. So there'd need to be. And the Vulcans are so logical, they would say, well, we need to bring 10 more ships. They would bring 10 more ships. They shouldn't be a 5 or 6 year confusion. They just do it.
Right. Yep. You know? Well, they would just do it, but you also have to remember they don't have unlimited resources, and there is a huge quadrant area Cold War going on between them and the Andorians right now. So it's not like this is the only thing the Vulcans are doing. They're doing many other things in many other places. So they don't have unlimited resources to dedicate just to this Earth problem. But
it's, like I said, there's probably tablets. We've designed tablets that can keep you fed, a single bar that has enough nutrition for the entire day. And they're warp capable. They should have something that could keep a human fully fed for a day, if not more than one day. And they should be able to send out billions of those tubes. It should be relatively easy. Like you say, not self-sustainable, but food should not be an issue.
Turan says hunger remained an issue in Japan into the 1950s after World War II, despite aid from the U.S. occupation.
Yeah, but these are space aliens with warp drive. It's not comparable.
Well,
the
scale is
country
directly
to a planet.
I would say it's directly comparable from United States to Japan to Vulcan to Earth. I think that actually mathematically, I think that lines up very succinctly. But just while we still have a few more minutes here, Sam, I know you really wanted to look at the ships. So we have this technically concludes the historical chapter part of the thing, but just because it's Star Trek, it's me, it's Trekyards, we do ships, this is what we do, and everybody here loves ships. There's a lot of content that's being thrown at you here, and I just thought it would be cool to break down what some of the Vulcan ships are. So we have this little annex here at the end of the book where we're looking at the Vulcan fleet of the 21st century, and the first one is the Sidiri Memp class, which is the Taplana Haith. Now, the Taplana Haith is not the class of vessel. That was the name of the ship that did the thing. Yeah. So I had to do a lot of research on this. That ship has no class name, so I had to invent one because nobody ever wanted to give it a class name. And this is the kind of stuff I was talking about with the Eagle Moss thing, where you don't get any of this information on it. They just said it was a Vulcan survey vessel from the 21st century, and one of them was named the Taplana Haith and landed on Earth for first contact. Like there would be so much more information on it. You'd be able to pull anything you wanted to know about its construction, who used it, how long it was used, and some of it's just techno-babbly talk, but I tried to make it at least make some sense and cohesivity between it. And this one is the most boring of them all because it's not one that I created. So you guys can read that on your own time. Let's go look at the ships that I created for this because I know that's what Sam will want to poke at real quick while we have some time to look at these real quick. Yeah. And guys, while we're talking about the ships, feel free to super chat some questions about the ships if you want, because we still have a few minutes here to make some money, and the more you super chat, the longer they're going to let me talk about this shit. So please super chat. So
good point. So the next one is the Iana class warp courier.
Yes. So this is like a
there, guys. Go check it out.
It's basically, think of it as like a heavy runabout or sized vessel. Essentially, it's bigger than a runabout, but it's got like technically 3 decks on it. Well, 3.5 if you count the crawl space at the bottom. I don't know if that counts as a deck or not. But I really wanted to talk a little bit about the Vulcan design philosophy because I really studied the history of the Vulcan designs that we see in Star Trek Enterprise, and to me, one of the interesting missing links there was we see ring ships, and we also see ships with these 3 little engine spokey things, and especially in the Carbon Creek episode, right, the little ship, the 1950s ship has 3 little warp engine things on it. It doesn't have a ring. So I'm like, okay, from a design evolution standpoint, there had to be some sort of transition period between these 3 little ring engine things and the actual ring that we have. So this is a ship that kind of shows that design transition in progress, which was really the main reason why I created it. Just so happens to be a courier.
Yeah. Cool. The next one is the cargo hauler, which is really cool. I love the way that's done.
Yes. Sam liked this one too. It's I don't know. I just wanted to
quite
start
Sulabunny when you start adding that many geometric shapes.
Yeah. A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. It is a little Sulabunny.
Is it separatable? Do you think they could split off the 2 pods in an emergency?
I'm gonna say probably not. I don't think this thing has any sort of emergency separation system to it.
For some reason, I get the image that there's a cargo malfunction and there's some dangerous something, and it's at the back pod and they can't separate the pod.
Lithium batteries start burning.
Or the Samsung Pad 7's just on fire. It'd be kind of cool if the front pod could like explosive bolt away.
Okay, yeah, maybe. Yeah, I didn't really think about that, but I envisioned the warp system as being an intertwined system, so it's not like the front section would be able to operate independently of the back one, and the whole thing would just kind of stop working from a warp perspective.
But logic would say dictate redundancy, though, so they should both be individually able.
Yes, and that is a fascinating contradiction with Vulcan ship design philosophy because there is no redundancy in their warp drive systems. They have a singular warp ring around their ships, and if that gets dinged, you're done. You're dunzos.
So don't get dinged. It's only logical.
Yeah, I guess. But yeah. So, anyways.
But also, there isn't really that many races out there who are in combat. As we go further along, I mean, there are more and more people with more and more big ships. In that point, I mean, there isn't big armadas, and you can't even travel across the quadrant to go fight. The Klingons aren't going to travel 8 months to go fight Vulcans. They're going to, combat gets more relevant the longer we go.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we have our cruiser ship here, the Merkala class, which is designed to be a predecessor to the Dakir that we see in Star Trek Enterprise. So hopefully you guys can pick up on the design cues there on that relate to the Dakir. Some of it, the accents and the design philosophy there should kind of draw your eyes to some certain parts of that. And then, you know, maybe one day I'll take this ship a step backwards and show you what the predecessor to this was. But we'll see. Well, actually, there's actually a higher chance of that happening than you think with the other things we're writing. But this was just the cruiser of the day. So a little battle shot of it fighting some Andorian ships that you can't see too clearly because I didn't have time to design them, but they're there. those floating chunks of metal blowing up in the distance are Andorian ships, I promise. So, yes, they are. There's Andorians in those fireballs. So, and you know, from it also, these aren't like, you guys have seen some of my ships where I really go kind of ape ballistic with the details. These ships are much lower, not lower quality per se, they're just not designed to be that kind of ship. And you'll see in the Bissigverse content and moving forward, we have some hero ships that are gonna, like for chapter 2 we have like one hero ship where we're basically pulling out the magic carpet for every last nook and cranny detail on it. But like a lot of the other ships that are going to be in it, and there's going to be quite a lot of ships in chapter 2, significantly more than there are in this one, are going to be more kind of like this tier 3D model. It's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah. And then the last page. All the thank yous and
our
acknowledgements to everybody.
Yep, our credits and acknowledgments. Because I mean, I of course this is my project. I'm the writer. I'm the one who puts this whole thing together, and I do all the 3D work. But there's a lot of other people that went in to making this, you know, a good product for everybody. And you know, I credited anywhere we pulled additional stuff from that we used. You know, I can't thank my artist Michelle enough for all the overwhelmingly amazing stuff that she does. Obviously our Trekyards guys here for hosting it and giving the Bissigverse a platform to kind of, because I mean the alternative is really kind of awful. Like if I just went and like made my own YouTube channel, I'd have like 10 people that even knew it existed, and it would just be me talking to you the whole time, and then nobody would watch it because there'd be nobody interjecting any space for error. And that nobody wants that. And then, you know, I have my friend Delante helps with the editing. I made my poor wife read this entire thing from cover to cover, and I know that she's not watching this, so I'll tell you guys, she actually fell asleep 4 times reading it. So if there are any typos in here, it's because that's probably a spot where she fell asleep and I just didn't remember where she left off at. But she really tried really hard though, so I think we got like 98% of them knocked out. And then Swan Productions for the music that you guys are hearing at the beginning and the end of this, that's a licensed thing we got off of Swan Productions, so it's extremely high quality music that I thought was fitting for a Federation national anthem at the end, and just a cool Bissigverse intro thing at the beginning. And thank all of you for everybody who's watching this now, for everybody who super chatted. That was awesome. We got way more super chats than I thought we were going to. I cannot tell you guys how happy I am and like how much that helps motivate me to just keep on keeping on doing this, because it's working.
It is a community. That's what we always say.
And all the guys in the Discord that, you know, look at all the stuff I post and interact with, you know, and provide feedback on my designs and things like that too. Huge thank you to them. And yeah, it was just what a ride it is. And we have at least 9 more of these to go. So buckle up, Buttercup.
Like I said, there is a Bissigverse playlist on the Trekyards, so go check it out. All the other stuff we've done with him. And thank you, David, for joining us. It has been awesome. I really love going through this stuff with you. You've really got it thought out, and I appreciate that. So
yes, and then we have one last question I want to address. Cosmo, the only reason I'm addressing is because this is something I've discussed potentially doing. Will there be an audiobook version of this? I can't read. Ready? Here you go. Shocking plot twist at the end of the live. I cannot read to save my life. I have some sort of reading disability that was just never diagnosed when I was a kid. I had horrendous times reading my entire childhood. I do audiobooks. I have hundreds of audiobooks in my Audible collection. I have a guy who can do it. I don't know. The problem we run into with the audiobook is that is a tremendous amount of time and effort that has to go into it, on not only on my end, but whoever the hell is going to be on the other end reading it. And we run into some problems there because I can't sell any of this stuff, and I don't want to go around asking for donations to do it. So I don't know if somehow there was a tremendous influx of money that arrived into Trekyards' pockets with this, and maybe they wanted to share some of that, maybe we could work on it. But I would love to do an audiobook. If I didn't sound like a bucket of screechy nails all the time, I would do it myself, but I'm not a narrator. And like I said, I do have a guy who's looked at it and said he'd be interested in doing it. Logistically speaking, I'm just not sure how I could make that feasible. But I wish I could, because a lot of other people have these issues that I have. They're not good readers, or they don't want to pull up the PDF. They just want to listen to this on their car on their way to work for the next 2.5 weeks, right? And then get through it that way. So
yeah, I prefer audiobooks 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, if a reasonable solution presents itself, I would very much like to take advantage of it. I just don't know how I would do it right now.
But speaking of right now, the poll, finishing off. Have you ever wondered about the deep, real-world history of Trek? A resounding 78% yes, all the info need, which we have given you. Some, 16%, and a dismissive 6% has been squashed under the heel of the needing info. That's 6%. Good.
All right, I think that takes us out.
Rick Benson says, "Move along and prosper." But yeah, that's the end of chapter 1, and we'll have more to follow. So guys,
can you tease when you might be finished with the next chapter?
So
a tease, not just a tease.
We're definitely trying to bring it to you, hopefully by midsummer time. I have a full-time job, and everybody else who's helping me with this is like side stuff that they do, and so we will see. Of course, there will be an intro video put out just like we did for this one, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more time. Right, we want to try to have maybe a month to give you guys to read everything. So won't commit to an exact release date, but chapter 2 is well underway. A lot of stuff is being worked on with it right now, and just stay tuned to Trekyards. You'll see an announcement video put out probably roughly a month before we're ready to do the live with it. And if you guys want to join like the Trekyards public Discord, I'm in there pretty regularly posting updates of things that I'm working on and stuff like that, if you want to see some of the behind the scenes stuff going on with that.
Yes, Abraxas, this is the end. So anyway,
Yes,
this
sir.
is the closeout. Thank you, David, for joining us. Thank you, all of you, for joining us as well. And until next time, he is Commander Cochrane.
He is Captain Foley.
And I am David Bissig. See, wow, I got it that time.
and you can't click the end of the live stream because there's another video as
I know there is. I'm waiting.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.